All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome and thank you for joining our webinar today, PPC Optimization in a World Without Average Position. All right, so here is a brief agenda that outlines what we will be covering today. The objective of today's presentation is to help identify new pay-per-click optimization strategies to improve ROI performance. Earlier this year, Google announced they will deprecate the long-standing average position data metric at the end of this month, along with the rollout of a handful of new functionalities that may impact campaigns if advertisers don't proactively adjust for the upcoming changes. Today, we will share proven tactics and strategies Vincodo has leveraged on behalf of our clients that can be implemented on any PPC campaign, whether the goal be user engagement, lead generation, or e-commerce sales. We will explain how you can adjust your current campaigns to account for Google's new functionality rollouts and highlight things to consider given these changes. Now I will tell you a little bit about Vincodo and introduce today's presenters. Vincodo is a leading digital agency in the greater Philadelphia area. We are data-driven marketers specializing in customer acquisition and sales growth via SEM and online advertising, including PPC and CPM direct buys, programmatic display, paid social, and video. My name is Kristen Foley, VP of Account Services. I have more than 20 years of agency and client experience and currently manage all aspects of client relations and project management here at Vincodo. Prior to joining Vincodo in 2012, I worked in several digital marketing roles, both on the agency and client side. Throughout today's presentation, please feel free to click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions and comments. I will be compiling feedback from the audience, and we will try to answer as many questions as possible at the end of today's webinar during our Q&A session. At this time, I will turn it over to Drew Brook, who will briefly introduce himself before diving into today's webinar.
All right, thanks, Kristen. Hey everyone, I'm Drew, and I head up the marketing services team over here at Vincodo, overseeing strategy and performance management for all of our core channels. SEM campaign management is where it all started for me back in 2006. While I do span a lot of the key mediums and channels here, paid search is still a very central part of my day-to-day. Adapting and evolving over time to drive the best performance for our partners is really what I'm all about to my core. So with that, thank you all again for joining, and let's geek out a bit. PPC optimization in a world without average position. It sounds a bit dramatic, but I don't really think it's as scary as it may sound. So what's changing? On September 30th, Google is sunsetting average position, as we all know. As a reminder for some of us here, average position or ad rank was only ever to gauge your auction competitiveness, not your actual page position, which is kind of a misnomer or misunderstanding in some places. With these ongoing changes in the presentation of the SERPs, for example, removing side positions, shopping ads taking over top placements and pushing other test ads out, map stack display prominence, to name a few, your rank is becoming less intuitive and actionable than ever, so it's a kind of good timing. So even though position is becoming less relevant over time here, and impression share and page location is coming to the forefront, this is still a major change nonetheless, and it forces us to make use of these new metrics in kind of enhanced ways to evaluate the competitiveness. And that's definitely why we're all here today. So here, a brief history of kind of how we all got here. Until 2012, average position was all we had for prominence measurement. In 2012, we got impression share introduced, in addition to some of the detail metrics, which might tell you whether your impression share was lost to rank or budget. In 2016, Google removed side ads to the SERP. We're actually going to show you an example of that on the next slide. I'm sure we're all very aware of it, but just as kind of a reminder, Google's idea there was to kind of increase some engagement with the remaining ads on the page and kind of force people to compete for the top locations. And it's importantly, as importantly, kind of as we've all seen, you can still serve at the top of the page, even though you may have a position or rank that shows in a position lower than 4. So with no sides on the left, positions are really kind of less intuitive and actionable than ever. Then in 2017, absolute top impression share, or ATIS, was introduced for shopping ads, allowing you to see whether your products show as the first spot on the grid. We finally start to get an understanding of your percent of impressions at a specific location on the page. And then last November, they made that and 7 other enhanced impression share or location share metrics available in keyword search. So we'll go over today impression share, top impression share, absolute top impression share rate, absolute top impression share rate, and click share. The remaining kind of 3 metrics are kind of the lost 2 pieces for those impression pieces, kind of like similar to the basic impression share. And then finally, in this year, Google made the announcement they're going to be deprecating position in Q4 2019. So starting beginning in essentially a week and a half from now, they're going to be removing it beginning the week of September 30th, as we kind of all know. So here's kind of an example of way things look before 2016, 2017 onward, as just kind of a display of what we're looking at now and what the difference is. We're seeing 3 ads there in the top location for the 2017 onward, even though we do see 4 in some locations. And then absolute top is your top position, as we've all kind of come to know. So why is it important? Well, knowing your competitiveness in the auction is essential to maximizing value at any performance target. Without a trustworthy and transparent knowing of the competitive metrics, you're going to overpay for traffic, push bids higher than they should be, or you're going to miss out on profitable volume because you think you have perceived strength but you really don't. So essentially, this is just over aggressiveness or under aggressiveness because the data is not what you think it is. Any challenges related to the data are going to impact optimization, no matter if your strategy is automation within Google or other platforms, or manual or hybrid approaches. But crucially here, we're all really excited because this is the first time we're actually getting page location. So it's definitely something to be used, and we're excited to figure out, how it can be most beneficial. So why did Google make the change? It's definitely a combination of clarity and opportunity. The first 2 quotes here are from executives at Google, so I'll go through them. These new metrics give you a clear view of your prominence on the page, more so than average position did. Next one, position is not enough to know your actual location on the page. These new metrics are specific and reliable indicators of page location, which is much more valuable. And we definitely do tend to agree with that. This can also be kind of a boost for clarity because position can be misleading for inexperienced marketers. Even though the best of us know that position is not page location, newcomers and novices commonly make that confusion, and it could lead to lower bidding aggressiveness. Like they may say, position 4, great, we're in the top of the page, job done, right? But we all kind of know that could mean you're missing out on a big chunk of share. It's kind of by removing position on the page, it removes that crutch and forces all marketers to kind of confront their actual share of the location on the page, which is more important. And lastly here, IS reliance or impression share reliance is that little nudge you need potentially to go after more opportunity, kind of confronting what you're not taking advantage of. So maybe in the past, position 3 was seen as safe, you're kind of showing up at the top of the page. But with the new metrics in mind, you probably might know that you might not be up there for 52% of the searches if you're only in position or previous position 3. So maybe that could be okay, but I think it kind of brings together some questions about strategy, pushing us to go a little deeper, and we think that could potentially be a good thing. So how does it impact us? Well, we have to adapt. So revamping reporting is the obvious one here. We're probably all up to date on this one at this point, but just pulling the basic new metrics into performance reports and dashboards, adjusting your engine views, pretty much the basic stuff. Revamping the mindset. So we're moving away from rank and towards share of actual page location. We're getting arguably a better picture here of what's going on in the auction, which means we'll be able to make better sense of what's going on, where the opportunity lies, and to help direct strategy for, I guess, the next decision strategy. But to do that, you need to know the new strength benchmarks, kind of the middle bullet here. What are the correlations between good and low in terms of, share versus position? We have some of these coming up and kind of the benchmarks we've seen from our testing over the last year. But they're going to be different for all of us. You know, it's going to be different for lead generation versus e-commerce, and pretty much in any different SERP or auction, it could be different. So we're going to have to all find our own strength benchmarks. You also need to know the blind spots. What does impression share cover? What doesn't it cover? When could you use it where it might be misleading? And when could it drive kind of lower results? And the last one, where can you use it to enhance the benefits? What are the best strategies for certain types of accounts and campaigns? Where could it hurt you? Where could it help you? So we're going to go over a lot of these today. So these new metrics, and it's new in quotation marks because of course we've had it for almost a year, but let's be honest, many of us here may not have been using these, kind of in a consistent manner up until this point. So if that's you, fear not, we're going to go over them in detail and how you can utilize them to drive great results for your clients or businesses. So the first big one here, search impression share. It is your impressions divided by the impressions that you were eligible for. Eligibility is the big key here, and it'll pop up for every share piece that we talk about. It's reliant on your current targeting settings, approval, bids, quality, budget, pretty much anything that could affect kind of where you show up in an auction. You may get more eligibility if you push your bid in an auction, but you also might get less eligibility if you have underperforming ad copy. So really, it's highly variable based on the changes you or your competitors make. It is targetable by bid strategies on the Google side, which is important because the share metrics are, but the page location rates aren't. So important to note there. And then you do get data for the previous day, not the current day, which kind of inhibits its use for current day bid strategies and kind of making adjustments on kind of some new things. And then lastly, to reiterate, it is a moving target. So the more you move your budgets, the more you move your bids and make changes, the more it's going to be a different number that you're constantly kind of chasing. So kind of important to know, and that's going to be also relevant to all the other share pieces that we talk about. So a couple other ones for impression share here. With so much change in the eligibility mix, your best tact is still going to be to move, read, and react. And this is going to come up for most of the things that we talk about today. You really can't set and forget it. You always got to assume that you're changing the mix and that you might need to address what's in that mix as you go about things before you pick another IS target. The next one here, quality factors are still going to be really essential. That's another kind of big takeaway. They continue to enable all the needed controls that you're going to need for efficiencies, and they're also the cheapest way to find more opportunity. And then crucially here, the kind of controls that you have in place in terms of keywords and structuring are going to dictate how helpful impression share could be as a target. So if you have restricted match types, good query isolation, impression share can be really useful for targeting. It's much more predictable because you're reducing the churn of the things that you're eligible for. But if you have loose match types and minimal negatives, it can be misleading. It gives the engine free rein to reach and match to new places all the time. And if you're trying to set aggressive targets, you should expect to see a lot of variable quality as you get going there. All right, so moving on to top impression share rates. So, the pieces that you see above the fold there, divided by all the eligible spots that you had, also targetable by bid strategies, and similar to the general share, you can't see data for the current day. And then I'm getting into some of the strength benchmarking here. So 45% or above on this metric, it tends to relate closer to a position. Above 50% is closer to a position 3. We find that usually is pretty strong for people getting solidly into the top 3 positions. On absolute top impression shares, that's you in the absolute top spot, similar to just general top share. About 45% or better correlates to probably old average position 1.5. And again, we'll have some better detail on this in a bit, but that's just kind of some general guidance. On to the rates. So the rates are actually the best proxy for your location on the page. So whereas the share is, did you serve there based on what you were eligible for, the rate is, importantly, where your ad showed up versus all of your impressions. So it is the average location of all of your impressions. So the best proxy for real position, kind of the first one that we've actually had. Intraday reporting is available, which is great. It's based on your own data. So you can use it for midday bid movements and new launches. It's kind of helpful in that way. But interestingly, it's not targetable by bid policies. And I have a quote from Google here. We do not recommend you use these market metrics to target your bids because sometimes they may decrease as bids increase. This happens as higher bids may allow you to increase more competitive auctions in worse locations. So we do see that. The other big caveat here, and that's the one kind of right below the non-targetable, if Google's not serving ads for a certain auction, then your rate could be extremely low and you don't really have much of an option to kind of force things. So we do see plenty of situations where you might have a really high share, so potential to serve in those high locations, but your rate might be terrible. It might be like 5% because, for example, Google is putting shopping ads or map stack ads or something else up there that's going to block out the ability for a search ad to serve. For here, 65% correlates with pretty much old position 3. So that is kind of important to note. And then absolute top, the other kind of version of the rate here. So your ability to show up in that absolute top position. Similar to the last one, about 55% correlates with being in position 1.5 or higher. And yeah, that's pretty much similar here. So you're not targetable by bid policies, same caveats having to do with is Google serving ads at the top of the page, etc. So moving on here to click share. So click share are the clicks that you got based on the eligible clicks, the max eligible clicks. So again, that eligibility kind of piece comes in for all the shares. So you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt. Ad copy factors also come into play a good bit because if you have a poor ad copy strategy, then moving higher on the page isn't going to be as predictable about driving higher share. So whereas the impression share pieces, you can push higher and expect to get higher for the most part, not so much on the click share. Although we do see if, as click-through rate does increase as you go up the page. So as you increase your bid, you're going to see higher things up to a point. 90% click share is about as high as we see. So even on brand terms that have like a 99% absolute top of page rate, still only see about 90% because 10% of people are probably going to click somewhere else. So important to note, don't usually see anything getting too much better than that. And also for reference, even though there's a lot of volatility with this metric and we don't really have, we're not going to show any more benchmarks on it because it's so related to your ad copy factors and the competition. We do tend to see that it breaks into the 20% range when you get above old position 3, which is considered pretty strong. We do see it max out at about 60% though, even when your absolute top percent is about 80%. So even if you're in the absolute top position on the page, for the most part, only getting about 60% of the clicks is still pretty good. And we're pretty much saying that between 30 and 40% is a strong metric. 1 in 3 or 1 in 2 people clicking on your ad is pretty good for owning the top of the page. Okay, so on to the adjusting of the benchmarks, and I bet this is what a lot of us came here for. What should we be targeting? How do the new metrics relate to old positions? So we have some pieces here on that. So we do have an easier to use matrix on the slide after this actually, but these are some of the top line findings just to give a little bit more detail. So this example here is from a current client in the lead gen industry using a moderately strong kind of page location target over about 5 months of data. We could have shown you every 10th of a position here, but for simplicity's sake, we're just showing whole and half positions. And I think these are going to be different based on the industry that you're in. Certainly in situations like e-commerce where you might not be able to serve an ad at the top of the page with reflection to the rate stuff. So you're all going to have to kind of figure these out a little bit on your own, but we've found these consistent over clients that don't have issues with ads getting served at the top of the page. All right, so starting with search impression share, it's not shown here because we don't see it aligns very consistently with position due to the big change in auctions and your ability to show up anywhere on the page. It does seem to kind of get a little bit stronger as you get above position 3, but it's not as predictable given kind of all the reasons that I cited there. Also noting an aggregate view of impression share can be flawed because it pulls together many aggregate meaning if you're rolling up a bunch of intent segments together, brand and non-brand together, it can be misleading because there's just too many different kinds of intent and different kind of targets under there to really be super valuable. So we think the page location metrics below are really the gold in terms of targeting. So kind of wanted to note that. So search top impression share, Higher prominence here, above 50%, that's where you're more likely to get above organic. Absolute top impression share, above 25%, which correlates roughly to old position 2, really starts getting you into that top spot. Another thing to note here, Google does not report impression share for any of these when the metric is under 10%. So we're using a 5% plug here, which is the stuff highlighted in yellow. Any of you know that have pulled this stuff and tried to use it for optimization or your own kind of bidding algorithms, you have to figure out some way to kind of work around. We use a 5%, and just kind of note that it's going to be a little bit misleading, but it's the best, essentially the best data that we have there. The next one, top impression share rate. So getting into 65 to 75% is quite strong for those. And again, we just keep reiterating, you are at the whim of if Google is going to be serving ads for that specific auction or industry type. The last one, absolute top, getting into top position, 35 to 40% of the time is super good. It's not until you really start owning that top position solidly that you start seeing that rate go above 70%. All right, so here's the more simplistic kind of matrix that we kind of put together based on the data that I referenced. So these are the prominence guidelines for share and placement on how it relates to the old average position on the current client example. Pretty much all the same caveats that it was a specific industry. It's going to be a little bit different for what you guys are seeing out there, and the same kind of caveats around the share stuff because it can be a little bit sketchy to use that if Google's not serving you. Also to note here that the percent targets that we're displaying are roughly at the bottom of the position tranche. So for those absolute top levels, they represent the lowest in that tier. So like, the peak 1 to 1.4 for search top impression share says 80%. We do tend to see it gets 85% and higher once you really solidly get closer to 1 or 1.1 or 2. So just wanted to kind of put that out there that those levels are achievable. We're just putting the kind of the lowest level in here as kind of like a go here and then go higher essentially to get to those levels. All right, so there's also some considerations for mobile devices here. We do see that for ISN location, desktop and mobile in this lead gen example are very similar in terms of the position you're holding versus how you do on those levels. It's going to be specific to the industry. For example, in e-commerce where shopping ads are dominating the top of the mobile SERP, you might have a tough time getting ads served there on mobile versus desktop, so things are going to change there quite dramatically. And that's really the big takeaway, that the devices are so different when it comes to the SERP that we have to treat them differently, which is kind of our best practice here. So we know for most advertisers, building a search campaign probably starts designing on desktop with desktop first in mind, and then mobile modifiers are added to increase or decrease the bidding aggressiveness at the campaign or ad group level. But of course, rolling up devices together means we kind of lose the ability to manage down to specific keyword ROI, and that has implications for IS targeting as well. So if you're too rolled up, you could be increasing on bids on desktop where you really shouldn't be increasing them on mobile. So our recommendation and kind of best practice is you need to break out campaigns by desktop and mobile so that you have control over the visibility for each of those pieces. It's important if you have automated bidding strategies for ROAS and CPA, as well as if you're doing manual strategies. And certainly with the impression share stuff, it can just be vastly different for that kind of stuff from a device to device. So best practice, got to break them out. All right.
Okay, and I noticed that one of the meeting attendees may have raised a hand at slide 23. So if you could please just submit any question you might have, and then we will table that for the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. So just wanted to make that note for all the participants. I know, not everyone may have joined all exactly at the same time. But now this is good. I get to give Drew a little bit of a break. He can catch his breath, get
Thanks.
a sip of water, so he's doesn't pass out. But thank you, Drew. I know that was a lot of information to cover, and many of us may be asking ourselves, what does this all mean? And as marketers, what can we do, and where do we go from here? So the content we will share now offers a little something for everyone. No matter what type of marketer you are, and regardless of what vertical or industry you're in, the strategies we are about to present apply to all marketers. And Drew also alluded to this in his previous slides as well. So whether you're lead generation, e-commerce, performance and branding, there are going to be nuances across all of those. However, we have leveraged these approaches across a wide range of industries with proven results. And with that, I know it was just a short break, but I'm going to turn it back over to Drew, and he will walk you through some practical bidding tips you can use and strategies that you can apply to your accounts.
Great. Thanks, Kristen.
Yes.
Okay, so for all marketers, stuff we really can all be doing that really isn't specific to performance or branding kind of from our perspective. So if you're using an automated impression share target, setting a max CPC limit is, I think it's nearly required, but we think it's really important, and it's definitely a big lever you have there to make sure you're getting the best quality. We usually start at probably about a 30% above the current average CPC of whatever segment you're talking about as like an initial max limit, and then kind of increase it and monitor it as time goes on. Ultimately, you can get to well over 100% above that initial average CPC baseline in terms of that max CPC limit, and still see the automated targets working quite well. But again, you have to monitor it and see, after a change, if what it does to results. Does it change quality? Does it change kind of the value you guys are getting? Second one here, for brand terms, IS targeting is probably the most sound strategy. Generally, we all want to hold top position 100% of the time for all the brand terms. So page location metrics make the most sense. And it's also kind of a reminder here that target CPA, target ROAS, and maximize conversions really should never be used for brand. Doing so can lead engines to either dramatically overbid for the traffic or underbid to the point where you lose prominence. So we do think IS targeting for brand, kind of makes sense, similar to kind of how we've been managing things for brand in the past. It's pretty much, what's the lowest bid you guys can sustain to make sure you're holding that really top of page prominence. It's always been about position and kind of rank versus the CPC. So similarly here, it's location versus CPC and opportunity. And a reminder here for automation, enhanced CPC really should be disabled there. It's only really for manual approaches. Enhanced CPC allows your bid to be moved 30% up or down by the engines based on intent signals they see. It's kind of seen as like a baby step introduction to automation for some advertisers. So it's not needed if you're going the automated approach. And lastly here, and this one's definitely covers everything, we need to be agile about impression share location management. And it's going to be key no matter the bid management. And it doesn't matter whether you're a manual or an automated bidder. So if you're a manual bidder, moving bids to manage the impression share targets is going to be key. And for automated bidding, moving the IS targets is the way to go. So either kind of direction here, you're going to be doing some kind of management and optimization. So just important to know. All right, so on to performance markers specifically. Sustained efficiency at volume is always going to be the primary goal for you. So ROI attainment is definitely first and foremost. Adjusting your bids and targeting is still primarily going to be based on how the keywords and segments drive to the bottom line. So we definitely understand that. Still, the new metrics provide great insight that we didn't really have before, which could be integrated into some of the strategies that you're currently using. So for example, there's going to be situations where you might have low conversion, low engagement signals to start. You could set targets for top or absolute top share for controlled segments that are known to produce well. I mean, maybe they have low conversion volume, but generally they should convert well. Essentially, you want to be there, but those segments do work in the long term, but you don't want to risk the engines pulling them back too far out of the fray based on small data sets. So it could help there. Also for newly launched content, targeting can also make sense there because you guys want to accrue a little bit of data before you might turn something over to CPA or start your manual approaches. So using an IS target for newly launched stuff, as long as it's reasonably set and not too aggressive, could also make sense. More stuff for performance marketers, and this one really is about the considerations we need to be aware of when it comes to automation. So for automated bidding, strategies for target CPA, target ROAS, maximize conversions are still probably going to be your go-tos, you performance marketers, and that certainly includes us to an extent. But yes, they're definitely going to be the places that you probably still go to first to maximize. And as a reminder here, the same upsides and downsides still kind of exist with an automated strategy. So we're going to talk about just briefly the downsides first. If you're not getting the volume that you want out of the strategy, you're mostly left with just moving your target to achieve more. Yeah, you can tweak audiences, ads, targeting, and a whole bunch of other things, but until those kind of get to a max level, but then you're left to kind of just trusting that the AI is going to do a good job and that there's no more volume left. So there's some inherent limitations to that. The other big one, which we've seen, is that if you have low conversion volume or low signals, it could lead to a premature minimization of bids. So it could reduce the ultimate potential to drive key volume through those keywords. If you get the AI gets it wrong, if the AI gets it wrong, those keywords may never get the chance. And so that's why sometimes we think kind of a hybrid approach of making sure that certain low volume buckets do have enough visibility so the engine has that data before flipping it over to some sort of automation is definitely key. Next one here, technical site issues can cause conversion rate drops, and it can really throw off algorithms, make them do kind of weird things. The system could be smart enough to disregard the data, or you might find a way to exclude it within the data, but those solutions can be imperfect. So just to kind of note on that one. Also, the systems can be slow to react if there's big day-of-week fluctuations. If you want to maximize conversions for specific days, and you see there's different conversion rates throughout the week or different search demand curves, the engines can be slow to react to those. Sometimes they could be pushing at the wrong time and missing the curve, and that could lead to an underutilization of kind of what you could be getting if you were doing a little bit more manual management. But there are upsides too, for sure. AI has a greater capacity to absorb and react to real-time data trends than any of us do. It goes without saying, it can react faster. And on to the next point, pretty much it has the ability to do it within the auction itself. It sees user intent patterns and signals that we're not really privy to at the time of the auction. So we're going to have a hard time toppling that. Positive results here are also way more predictable if you're a consistent and attentive marketer. So if you're really highly engaged with how the system is working and how it's managing the performance, then you can really offset some of the concerns that we highlighted above. And lastly, the quality of optimization really should keep improving over time. The AI is going to get smarter, and your results could really benefit from that trend if you're on board. All right, so for you branding marketers, these ad placement location metrics are definitely a great help to you. Your goal is to achieve predictable visibility, and that's pretty much what these are all about. You should be looking at how your intent segments perform all the way through to site engagement and using that to drive impression share and location targets for those specific segments. So you can link up Google Analytics and Google Ads and understand cool stuff like cost per new visit, cost per new non-bounce visit, just to name a couple. You can set auto bidding strategies to target those. Or rather, you can't do that yet, but wouldn't that be cool if you could? So I think that's probably the holy grail for branders, is if it would be somehow possible for the system to optimize towards the best kind of engagement versus just your place on the page. So we're not quite there yet, but you are able to pull some of those things into the Google Ads interface to do your own optimization, but strategies cannot yet be applied to do that. After understanding your performance baselines on a cost per engagement, you can set your locations and have them managed by automated strategies or more manual strategies. And then kind of importantly here, the automation downsides don't really exist here as much for you as it does for the performance marketers. Your goal is to be visible for the most part. So you're not really reliant on site performance or conversion volume, which could be low. All the action to meet the goals happens within the auctions. So automation really could make the most sense for you all. So on here and on the next slide, we have kind of more of a wrap-up tips of kind of some of the things we talked about, just to kind of get some recommendations out of the way and also some things to look out for. So the big one here, quality factors are still super essential. Very relevant ads, good landing pages, ad extension adoption, best practice kind of keyword bucketing. All that stuff is the mix that makes you competitive, and we still have to really make sure we're working on those things. We're also guessing that this shift to impression share could create some competitiveness, an increased competitiveness for the short term or the long term. I mean, Google certainly hopes so. So that should mean that your quality score is more important than ever. It'll allow you to be competitive as everybody else is pushing forward, and it's the cheapest way to get into some of those auctions. Next one, a read, react, and adjustment cadence is still the best approach, we think, for pretty much all optimization strategies. Know your performance baselines, pick the target specifically, then read, react, and retweet. That goes for setting automated strategies, setting manual pieces, or doing kind of a hybrid approach. It's pretty much evaluating a change in volume and the quality after a tweak, and then deciding if a change in share replacement is the best way to go, or if you should be addressing quality factors. And then the next, be specific about targeting and monitoring of IS and location metrics. So at a minimum, we must be breaking out brand and non-brand, and we talk about these things. There's also really big value to breaking up prospecting segments and reporting. Everything is going to perform differently, so we have to look at them differently and set different targets. Roll-up views can be quite misleading, and there's often just way too much varying intent underlying in them, and they can be misleading, so important to note that. And then targets are only as good as the controls you have in place. So you have to watch out for overly loose match types, underbuilt negative terms, and overly rolled up keyword buckets, which with too much intent kind of underlying. All those things will make it very difficult to use an impression share or targeting strategy in a reliable way. All right, so we got a few more here. Impression share alone can be misleading, as we kind of noted earlier, because the eligibility mix just changes so much. Loose keywords will change the auction mix. If your devices are rolled up, it will change it dramatically. It just becomes very difficult to use that as kind of an omnibus target. Again, while we think the location metrics are better than the overall share metric. And also remember, IS and location only relate to search and shopping ads, not other clickable ads within the SERP. So for example, business location max stat is not included in impression share. So there's really big click potential, including yourself in those stacks for many advertisers. But because it's not included in the impression share, you wouldn't know that you're missing out on that clickable element if you're just looking at impression share alone. So it's kind of a good reminder, you need to keep an eye on the different kind of elements that are popping up into your SERP for whatever client or business that you were talking about, to kind of gauge if there's more click potential there and if it's being brought into these share pieces, because if it's not, then you could be missing out on some potential. And then another kind of just reminder here, Google may not be serving your ads or any ads at the top of a SERP for a certain type of industry or a certain type of auction. So be really careful by using the rate metrics to bid to and evaluate. Yep. All right. Oh, wait, actually, I had a couple more. Okay. Yeah, so shopping and organic elements could be favored in text ads, and they could steer you in the opposite direction, what I mentioned for rate. So really sticking to impression share, like the share stuff for bid targeting and optimization is the way to go, and using the rate percentages for kind of more context to evaluate performance is kind of what we recommend. There's kind of two sides of the fence there. All right, so on to these upcoming or currently kind of out there match type changes and their potential impacts. Some of you may be aware of these. Google's kind of put this out in their so they're more kind of like public offerings over the last couple months, and we think it's going to have a big impact for the industry here. And we're going to wrap up with what the changes are and how we think you can react to them. And we think it does kind of combine a little bit with what we've been talking about in terms of share. All right, so what's changing? Keyword match types are going broader. The same meaning introduction, Google introduced this on exact match terms back in 2018 as a baby step. So same meaning means essentially, I guess that lawn mowing now means grass cutting. And that may seem kind of intuitive and maybe innocuous for this example, but we'll have to see kind of what it exactly means once it's fully rolled out. So on the positive side, you may reach people that you hadn't before because it's expanding in productive ways. On the negative side, if the correct intent matching kind of fails, you could be showing up for undesirable things. So in Google's example here, before we also had some control over what terms had to show up in a query, but the control has now been removed from a positive targeting standpoint. So in actuality, and this is big, there's actually really no way left to precisely target a specific word in a query without using tons of negatives to kind of force that issue, no matter what the match type is. So that's definitely a big deal. You have to hope that they're going to do it intelligently and only a way that's going to help, and that it's not going to create some kind of like endless whack-a-mole. So it's definitely a major step in the direction of AI reliance versus marketer intelligence and expertise. We think the expansion seeks to address three concerns from engines and marketers. The first one, definitely claimed by Google, 15% of new queries, rather of queries, are never seen before. So Google's the only one really privy to those, and we would only really see them if we were pulling constant search query reports and able to see the queries that don't get clicks, which we can't. So that would be one reason to be a fan of this. Secondly, marketers, seasoned or not, could be too restrictive on their match types, which limits reach. Third, people could be underbuilt on keywords, which also limits reach. So pretty much these three things, I'm sure Google is thinking this is a way to make sure everybody's really as maximized as they can be. The most reach possible is the idea. So what are the strategies to maximize those benefits? So importantly here at the top, Google's saying if a current query matches to, if a query currently matches to an exact phrase or broad match modifier keyword, they'll prevent that query from matching to a different one. So this is their way of saying we're not doing this to create kind of ridiculous whack-a-mole. It should be additive, and we're certainly hoping that's the case. But this still kind of means that best practice query mining, keyword building, and structure controls are pretty much the strong levers that we have here to make sure things are kind of heading in our direction. And a reminder here, we only see clicks in search query reports. We don't see impressions. So we have to use long time frames to uncover questionable query trends, and also need to be really focused on keywords with super low click-through rates as this comes out more than ever because of this, the same meaning potential. We're not really sure what it's going to be matching to, so we have to keep a close eye. So you have to mine the search queries more regularly. Look for variations to block or shift and isolate into positive segments. Find the new valuable variations and move them into positive and controlled scenarios. So the same meaning thing really is a double-edged sword, but we can force it into the helpful direction by just monitoring queries regularly to maintain that control. And as noted, Google's also kind of saying it's matching to an existing keyword in quotations here. We hope it means close variants, like we hope it means plurals and misspellings. I think and hope it probably does, given that's the direction they've been heading with their expansion of matching over the last couple of years. Because if it didn't, you could imagine the endless exponential query, or rather keyword expansion we'd have to do to make sure that we're forcing it. I don't think Google wants that, right? So our guess here is that they are including the close variants within that matching for existing terms, and certainly let's hope so. All right, last one here. Ad group structuring needs to adapt in order to kind of facilitate better query control. That's already a best practice when it comes to ad groups, but it's going to be even more crucial now because the same meaning stuff could mean a lot of things that we're not really exactly sure yet. We're going to need to expand the negative terms to force the beneficial same meaning versions into controlled places, and that's really only possible with best practice ad group structures. So as a reminder, ad group structure best practices, separating them by match type so you're able to do good isolation of what kind of queries get in, then using ad group level negatives to force proper query flow, which helps block the exact match versions in the broad ad groups. Also, of course, grouping by user's search intent, helping to hone in quality score for the ad group level, as well as creating really great ads to focus on that intent. Better user experience, better click-through rates, better landing pages. All those things are all about kind of honing in and getting close to the intent. And then isolating high volume generic terms from long tail, which is pretty basic. So if we do all that, I think we'll be just fine. So summary, and I think we have kind of 4 big ones here before we kind of maybe get into any questions that are kind of out there. So these share and place, these placement metrics definitely bring enhanced value. Targeting them exclusively may not make sense depending on your performance goals, but it definitely does for some segments, no matter what kind of marketer you are. Choosing specific targets based on your performance is the way to go, and then it's just read, react. So whether you're in automation, whether you're doing a manual approach, you're still kind of managing the system, managing the targets, looking at the performance, and kind of going from there. Ad copy development and addressing quality factors still need to be kind of the core of what we do here, because things are going to be more competitive than ever. And yeah, it just needs to be, you know, elemental continually for what we do. And then keyword building and structuring and negative strategy are more important than ever to maximize value, because we're not exactly sure what these same meaning queries are going to mean. We hope it means a good thing, but at minimum, we're going to have to, you know, put some controls in there. So it's going to be needed, no doubt. Cool.
Okay.
Q&A.
All right. So let's see here.
Let's see, yeah.
So, see, because I know we've got a few questions in the queue.
Trying to see them. All right, so I got 3 here. So if I'm using target CPA and I'm not achieving my impression share targets, what do you recommend? Well, I guess it depends on the kind of keywords that are underlying there. So certainly, I guess we're talking about prospecting and kind of the, you know, a mix of stuff going in there. I guess you're kind of limited with the target that you can put in for a CPA. I did mention there were some kind of elements underlying that you can mess with in terms of your modification around locations. You could be having issues with your quality score, it sounds like. It's hard to know. You might have a target CPA that's too low for the industry that I guess you're targeting. But if you have a great quality score and great factors, that would allow you to get better share over time. So I think that's probably where I'd look first. I'd look for keywords that have low quality scores. I'd look at quality score factors that talk about whether the ad is playing a part, whether the landing page experience is making a part. And if you short up those things, then I would probably then look at maybe some location modifiers and maybe some other audience related pieces that you could modify to get to the next level. Okay.
Okay. All right, we've got another question. How important is the application of negative keywords? Should we be predicting potential mismatches or waiting for bad matches to show in search query reports? So targets, as we mentioned in one of the previous slides, targets are only as good as the controls that are put in place. So negatives are extremely important, particularly for the query flow that Drew had alluded to earlier, especially given the fact that the match types are going broader. You need to have comprehensive negatives applied to ensure you're not showing on searches where you don't want to be. And I'm thinking you probably want a hybrid approach, and Drew may want to jump in here as well. I mean, I think you wanted to do a proactive approach.
Yeah, we just don't know.
And monitor the bad.
Definitely. Matches. Yeah, we just don't know what they're going to do with the same meaning stuff. You know, and there's no way that 10 out of 10 times it's going to be helpful. So, you know, I'd say kind of planning ahead. You know, maybe a little bit, but I probably, again, it's probably more read and react. It's probably look at what they're doing, look for places that it could be helping and that you could allow it to keep flowing in that direction, and places that it's hurting and you need to isolate. So I tend to get there because you just really can't imagine all the different ways that Google's going to try the same meaning match.
Okay. We've got one more question here. Do your guidelines apply to shopping campaigns? And are there any additional considerations for shopping campaigns?
So for shopping campaigns, you have a much more limited ability to control your visibility. You know, you can't pick the keywords that you're going to show up on. You know, you really can't even force yourself onto the front page of the SERP in a pretty predictable way either. So you're kind of left to, I guess it's similar to kind of like the quality stuff we were talking about in basic search stuff, making sure that your content around titles and descriptions kind of help you get to the top. In terms of what is good share, what is bad share, probably has to do similarly with the eligible piece. So I would imagine that still those hold pretty well. If the engine's saying that, you know, you have a very strong rate at the top of the page, it should be something similar to what we're seeing in search. So yeah, I would say that those benchmarks, at least for the share pieces, are usable for for shopping, but your ability to kind of go in and hone is not as predictable, I would say, as searches.
Okay. All right, and it looks like those were the questions we had today. I'm going to move on to, all right, so, well, first we want to thank you for your time. We hope you found the webinar to be informative and gain some insights that you can leverage for your business. For anyone who would like a copy of today's presentation, please email me at kfoley@vincodo.com. We will also be posting a video recording on YouTube in the next couple of days, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you all again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.